Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This will be my last time getting to address you, so I want to thank you for your service, your time and dedication that you've spent on this case. We really appreciate it. This is something that is obviously very important to the community and very important to Mr. Holder Jr. As I told you in my opening statement, I was very upfront. I told you where we were going and what I would like you to look for. We told you that Mr. Holder Jr. did shoot Mr. Ascadon and accidentally shoot Mr. Latham and graze Mr. Villanueva. But that it was not first-degree murder and it was not first-degree attempted murder against Mr. Villanueva and Mr. Latham. We told you that it was voluntary manslaughter and that he acted in a heat of passion. We told you what that heat of passion that he acted under consisted of. It consisted of being called publicly a snitch by someone as famous as Nipsey Hussle. And we believe that that is what the evidence showed. Mr. Holder was born in 1989 and he grew up in South Central Los Angeles in rolling 60s territory. Like many children in that area, he was peer pressured into joining the gang and joined the gang at the age of 13. Over the years, he accumulated tattoos, numerous tattoos on his body, some gang related, some not. But he never built up a criminal gang activity history. He only had the one conviction from 2012 for felony possession of a firearm. Never went to state prison, did some time in county jail, 3 years probation, and that was it. By the time his daughter was born, he had already moved away from the rolling 60s and that lifestyle. By 2019, he had completely put the rolling 60s in his rearview mirror. He was just living his life in Long Beach. He moved into an apartment with his uncle that he shared with his uncle in Long Beach. He had not been in the rolling 60s neighborhood, and no one had seen him in years. He had a job at a restaurant, which if anyone worked at a restaurant, you know it's hard work. Whether you're a busboy, waiter, dishwasher, they're all hard jobs. And he was pursuing his hobby of making music in his cousin's studio. On February 25th, 2019, he met Ms. Nicholson as his Lyft driver. Got her number. Coincidentally, she was moving in an apartment building right next door to where he lived. And they hung out together over the course of the next 35 days. She said about every other day. So we're talking about 17 days. 17 times they hung out together. And over that period of time, they hung out. They went to Walk of Fame in Hollywood. They went to Santa Monica Pier. They went to the beach. They went out to eat. They went shopping. And he brought her over to his cousin's house while he recorded music. And she said that during that time period, he was never violent, never threatened her. She didn't believe that he was in a gang at all. On March 31st, 2019, she wanted to go to the Slauson swap meet. Mr. Holder Jr. wanted to go get something to eat. At first, they were going to go to In-N-Out Burger. Had they gone to either place, none of us would be here today. But Mr. Holder had a craving for the famous chili cheese fries at Master Burger in his old neighborhood, and so he directed her how to get to that neighborhood and where to go. And she was excited when she first got there. She saw Nipsey Hussle. She said, "Ooh, he's fine. I'm going to go take a picture with him." Mr. Holder didn't react in any jealous or angry manner. He didn't say anything about what she had just said. As they're pulling in and she's making that comment, at the same time, unbeknownst to them, Nipsey Hussle is turning to Rimpow and saying, "Is that shitty?" Because no one had seen him in the neighborhood for years. And he says, I wonder how this is going to unfold. So let's hear how Cowboy, Mr. Herman Douglas, describes that encounter.
That Eric and then we're all like, yeah. And I distinctly looked at Nick and I heard him saying to himself, I wonder how this is going to unfold. And that, you know, and that fucks me up.
So that statement by Nipsey Hussle shows that in his state of mind, he's already anticipating confrontation with Mr. Holder Jr. I wonder how this is going to unfold. Why would you say something like that? Unless in your mind, you're thinking, I'm going to bring up that I heard that he was snitching. I wonder how this is going to unfold. He already had a confrontational state of mind when Mr. Holder just drove up. But if you look at the conduct of Eric, his state of mind was an innocent state of mind. He was just hanging out, living his life in Long Beach, coming over to the neighborhood to get some fries, some chili cheese fries. He knows that he's not in the gang anymore. I'm sure he sees them and he's thinking, okay, I'm not in the gang anymore, I'm not active, but I'm not going to snub them. I'm going to go over and say what's up while my food is getting ready. And that's exactly what he does. No animosity or anything like that. Of course, we now know that Nipsey Hussle and Cowboy and Rim Pal and Mr. Holder Jr., they all knew each other growing up in the neighborhood. Nipsey was 4 years older than Eric, but they all knew each other.
Yeah, I look at Rim Pal and he say,
So I'm playing a clip of Defense Exhibit H. So Eric puts in his order, pays in cash. And then he casually walks over to go say hello while his order is being prepared. Nothing nefarious, no plan, no plot, no hatred towards Nipsey Hussle, no jealousy because his music is successful and Mr. Holder's is not. He's just going over to say hello while his order is being ready. Play. Defense. He walks over to the group, he shakes Nipsey Hussle's hand, he shakes Rim Pal's hand, he shakes Cowboy's hand. He doesn't shake the random stranger that's there because he doesn't know that guy. And he takes his place among the group and leans up against the car next to Nipsey. Nipsey turns and starts talking to him. And out of the blue, Nipsey Hussle is accusing him of snitching. Right? Where did that come from? And now we see at 44 seconds, if you could pause it there. Nipsey Hussle accuses him of snitching and that they have paperwork on him. So this is in front of Rimpau, Cowboy, this random stranger, and Ms. Nicholson. What you're looking at now is, you can see the 44 is circled. That's at the 44-second mark. And you can see Ms. Nicholson has arrived in the group. And Nipsey Hussle is still talking to him. They're still talking about snitching. Think about Eric's state of mind at this point. You know, I just came over to say hello, haven't been around for a while, just waiting for my order to be ready. I'm not involved in that lifestyle anymore. And the famous, the great Nipsey Hussle is saying that they have paperwork on me. What's this guy's angle? Why is he doing that? Why is he doing it in this public manner? Why is Nipsey Hussle saying that they have paperwork on me, which is calling him a snitch? You know, they're doing wordplay when they get on the witness stand, but having paperwork on you, both experts have said that that is calling you a snitch. In fact, both experts testified that telling someone that they have paperwork on you is worse than being called a snitch, because if they have paperwork on you, they have documentation that you're a snitch. It's not just a rumor. There's actually documentation showing that you've been snitching. So that's actually worse by saying they have paperwork on you. So Eric's state of mind is thinking, what's going on? You know, I'm in this group, I'm surrounded by these guys who are rolling 60s, I grew up with them in the neighborhood, and now Nipsey Hussle is outing me as a snitch. Growing up in that neighborhood, in the rolling 60s, Nipsey Hussle would have known that this was a serious accusation against Mr. Holder. Especially in light of the fact that Mr. Holder hasn't been in the neighborhood for years. Both experts told you that that would be suspicious. If you're not in the neighborhood for years, and then someone accuses you of being a snitch and having paperwork, then it kind of seems like, okay, that's why you haven't been around for years, right? You've been ducking out. You don't want anyone to retaliate against you. You've been hiding out. You know you've been snitching. That's why you haven't been coming around. Both experts told you that. So someone with Nipsey Hussle's status and knowledge of growing up in the rolling 60s would know that this was a serious accusation with serious possible consequences to Eric. Now, the DA has downplayed being labeled as a snitch, and we know that that's not true. We know that people are afraid of being labeled as a snitch. How do we know that? Because we know that the rolling 60s controlled a large swath of area in South LA. And right smack dab in the middle is the Marathon Clothing Store, which is a hotbed of rolling 60s gang activity. Their own expert testified that the city of Los Angeles, the city attorney's office, and the LAPD have been trying to shut it down up until Nipsey Hussle's death, because it's been a hotbed of criminal gang activity.
Ladies and gentlemen, you heard the evidence, you determined what the facts are. For you to decide. Continue.
And specifically what he said was they deemed it a public nuisance. We know that the rolling 60s have over 1,200 members, larger than an army brigade. But look at the numerous examples from this particular case as to how serious people from the neighborhood take snitching. Mr. Latham got shot in the back, ended up in a wheelchair. He comes into court and he tells us, I don't know nothing, don't see nothing. He wouldn't even identify himself laying on the ground in the video. This is a man who's done 26 years in state prison, and he still doesn't want to snitch on the rolling 60s. We know that Mr. Villanueva, his nephew, was reluctant to cooperate. We know that Ms. Nicholson received a threat and had to be escorted out of the building by additional detectives during the course of her testimony. We know that Melody James hung up the phone on Detective Washington and told him she didn't want to testify in this case. We know that Rim Pop, the other gentleman in the white t-shirt with his back to us, the one who ran away successfully, we know that he's in the wind, that the judge issued a $500,000 bench warrant because he refused to come to court to testify. So we know what people think about snitches and that they don't want to be labeled as a snitch. They specifically don't want to snitch against the rolling 60s because they know that there's serious consequences to that. It's not just something that happened in the 80s or 90s as Cowboy testified to. Let's play the next slide. This is the grand jury testimony of Cowboy when he was on the witness stand back in May of 2019 when Mr. McKinney was questioning him about the consequences of snitching. Okay, because in game culture, snitching is not a good thing to be known to do, correct? Cowboy, yes. McKinney, what are some of the consequences that can flow from somebody who snitches? Cowboy, everything from getting beat up to getting killed, right? Back then, he wasn't saying, oh, that just used to happen in the 80s, or that was in the 90s, and everyone snitches now, and there's just rumors flying around, and nothing really happens. No, that's the answer he gave. Everything from getting beat up to getting killed. That is the consequence of snitching. On his Instagram account, when he was streaming on the first day of jury selection outside the courthouse, he was trying to justify why he was going to testify to the gang members or other people in the community who felt like he was doing something wrong by coming in and testifying, AKA snitching. He already snitched under their definition, and they have paperwork on him because he had testified at the grand jury, but it was sealed. And so no one knew at the time.
Objection. This goes back to the record counsel.
Ladies and gentlemen, guided by the facts you received in this court, well, the evidence you received in this court, you determine what the facts are.
So let's look at what Cowboy had to say in his Instagram live stream video on the first day of jury selection, in this case, June 2nd, 2022.
I ain't hard to find. You feel me? Where I come from, snitches don't last. Niggas snitching and all that shit. That shit don't work. Where that work at?
Those were his own words, right? Snitches don't last. Where I come from, snitches don't last.
I ain't hard to find. You feel me? Where I come from, snitches don't last. Niggas snitching and all that shit. That shit don't work. Where that work at?
So this was a serious accusation that someone of Nipsey Hussle's stature was making against little Eric Holder Jr., who just came into the neighborhood to get some chili cheese fries and get his order and then go about his business with Ms. Nicholson. So Eric tries to figure out what it is that what is Nipsey's motive? What is his motivation? So Eric tries to clarify. So if someone in that position was suddenly confronted in front of other people, in front of other rolling 60s and strangers, that they were a snitch, you try to figure out, well, what is the motive of Nipsey Hussle? What is going on here? Why is he doing this? And so Eric was trying to get clarification as to what Nipsey Hussle was accusing him of. That's part of the record, you know. Thank you. There was a name mentioned, according to Ms. Nicholson. She doesn't remember the name, she didn't catch the name, but she remembers that a name was mentioned during the time that she was there. She said that Mr. Holder was trying to get clarification on who it was that Nipsey Hussle was accusing him of supposedly snitching on. Brianita's testimony is very important here because Cowboy was not being forthcoming about what was talked about during that conversation. Although she was just there to get a selfie, and she's pretty naive about things in the real world, I mean, most of us would say this was probably an important conversation and maybe our ears would perk up. Hey, Nipsey Hussle and this guy I've been seeing talking about snitching and they're accusing each other of snitching. That's interesting, what's going on here? But she seemed to not really think that it was important. She was just going to wait until they finished, till she got her opportunity to take a selfie and then go to the car and post it. Little did she know she was a part of a very serious conversation. When I say a part of it, she was listening to this conversation. She was picking up the tone. She was picking up certain cues from the individuals who are engaged in this conversation, namely Nipsey Hussle and Eric Holder Jr. This is what she testified to at trial on direct examination from Mr. McKinney. McKinney, so can you help us understand what do you mean? Brianita, you know, like talking loud, like get a point across, like because he was trying to get an answer up out of him. Like, did you say I snitched? like trying to make him answer the question, which he didn't really want to answer. McKinney, okay, now, the first time you told us you heard, what you heard was Eric say to Nipsey, did he snitch? Now you're saying you heard him say, so did you say I snitched? Those are two different things, right? Ryanita, right. McKinney, did you hear both? Ryanita, no. That's what I'm saying. Like Eric was saying, did he snitch? Basically, if he snitched, did Nipsey tell anybody he snitched? Which is Eric. So Eric is trying to get clarification, trying to get an answer up out of him, asking Nipsey, did you say I snitched? He's trying to get clarification of what it is that Nipsey Hussle is actually accusing him of. He was talking loud, like to get his point across. This was not just a pleasant conversation between homies who are chopping it up and, oh, I'm just looking out for you, and you should know they got paperwork on you, you should go take care of it. This was a serious accusation. Mr. Holder Jr. took it serious as it was. He knows the consequences of being called a snitch in this matter. This is what Ms. Nicholson also told us. This is from her grand jury testimony. McKinney, how many times did you hear Eric say something to Nipsey about snitching? Brianita, it was a lot of times. I don't know the number, but it was like multiple times. Like he was saying it back to back. All right, so this is something that Eric took seriously. It wasn't just like some, oh, these are just rumors, they go all over the community, this isn't something you have to worry about. Mr. Holder took this very seriously when Nipsey Hussle was accusing him of being a snitch in this matter in public. Ms. Nicholson also told us about the tone and tenor of the conversation and the people having this conversation about snitching. She said that there was tension many times throughout her interview. She said Mr. Holder's demeanor was aggressive. He was messy. He was trying to get clarification. Nipsey's demeanor was irritated, was trying to brush him off. Was like, this guy needs to go somewhere. Most of us would call that being dismissive. Can you play Defense Exhibit J, please?
And stuff, and then
You know what they were talking about?
he was saying a lot of cuz.
Who was?
Eric.
Can you hear what they were saying?
I didn't really like kind of understand it, like what he was talking about, but I know like to tell from the tension from Nipsey, like he didn't really want to talk to him, like trying to like, you know, like get to me, like to take the picture or whatever, like trying to wait till he stopped talking.
Do you know why he wouldn't want to talk to him?
Because I guess the way he was just like, cuz, hey, you ever snitched on somebody, cuz this, cuz that.
That's what Nipsey was saying?
That's what Eric was saying. Nipsey wasn't like saying nothing, he was just like, nah, you know, nah, like that, you know.
Did it sound like Eric was accusing him of snitching?
To me, it sounded like, kind of like, he was trying to be a little messy.
Oh.
You know, like, I wasn't kind of like getting into it, but you know, because I'm not the messy type, I'm just like kind of like listening, but I'm just like, okay, like, what is he talking about? Like, to myself though. And then, but I can tell, like, by looking at Nipsey or whatever, because, you know, I'm waiting to take the picture, like, he looking like, you know, he need to go on somewhere. That's how I got the impression.
As persistent as Eric was with Nipsey of trying to get details, Nipsey gave him no details. No names, no cases, no descriptions. So from a reasonable person's point of view in these circumstances, how are they supposed to address it, right? You're supposed to go and get your paperwork and show everybody that you were not snitching. But in this case, there is no paperwork. You don't even know what he's accusing you of doing or who you were supposed to have snitched against. So how are you going to go get some paperwork when this unfounded accusation is against you? How are you going to clear your name? How are you going to clear your reputation? There's no way to do it. He knows he hasn't snitched. There's no paperwork for him to get. He had the one case in 2012, which was 7 years ago. So what is Nipsey Hussle talking about? Then, when Eric presses for details, Nipsey gets irritated and brushes him off and said, this guy needs to go somewhere. That was according to Ms. Nicholson's testimony. So a reasonable person in those circumstances may conclude, this is just Nipsey Hussle calling me a snitch. I know there's no paperwork out there. He's not giving me any details. This is just something that he's passing around the neighborhood, right? Cowboy never joined in and said, oh yeah, I heard that too, it's so-and-so. Or Rimpao never said, oh yeah, I heard that too. It's just Nipsey Hussle that's saying this accusation against him, putting a snitch jacket on him. This is a provocation that stirs up rage and powerful emotions, swirling around the head. Rage, that he would do this in public, in the heart of Rolling 60s territory, in a complex that he owns, when Eric just came there to buy food. Confusion. Why is he doing this? What's his motive? What is he talking about? Frustration. Refuses to give me any names or any details.
You know, it's an objection I made before. I'll record once again. Pardon?
I didn't mention any names.
Approach once again.
And all of a sudden, you're being called a snitch. And then when you press for details, the person gets irritated with you because you keep asking them to explain what they're talking about. And they brush you off, and that you need to go somewhere. You would think that this is Nipsey Hussle making up this rumor about me. And if he said it the way Cowboy said he said it, on one of the times when he testified, he said it so many different ways. I haven't seen the paperwork, but I heard they have paperwork on it. All right, stop right there. If you haven't seen the paperwork, then why are you running your mouth about it, right? You're the one spreading this rumor in front of other people, in front of this stranger, in front of this lady. You don't even know that she's with me. Why are you spreading it if you haven't seen any paperwork, right? So you would think that he's putting a bounty on me. He's outing me as a snitch. This is Nipsey Hussle making it up. Cowboy didn't say anything. Rimpao didn't say anything. This was just Nipsey Hussle's doing. So this is a provocation. This would stir up a range of powerful emotions swirling around the reasonable person's head in the same or similar circumstances. Some of the emotions would be rage. You'd be enraged that he would do this to you in public, in the heart of Rolling 60s territory, in a complex that he owns, in front of other people, when you just came to get some food. Confusion. You don't know what he's talking about. He's not giving you any details. Why is he doing this to me? Frustration. Refusing to give you any names, any details, so that you could get this supposed paperwork and clear your name. Humiliation. Doing this in front of Cowboy, Rimpao, some stranger, and Ms. Brianna. Brianita. And fear for your life and safety. Nipsey Hussle carries a lot of weight. What if he calls you a snitch in a song and names you? These are the things that you would be considering as to why he's doing this in this public manner. Now, if he was just looking out for you and just trying to warn you about this rumor, why not walk you over to the side and say, hey, this is what I heard, you might want to go take care of it, you know, I'm just looking out for you, you better watch your back. No, he didn't do that. He did it in front of 4 other people. Now, the DA mentioned in his closing, well, why would Eric even care? He lives in Long Beach. Really? Where does he think Long Beach is? Does he think Rolling 60s can't get you in Long Beach? Does he think that you won't run into a Rolling 60s somewhere that heard that you were snitching when you're at the Hollywood Walk of Fame or the Santa Monica Pier? Do they think that you would only be in fear if you're in Rolling 60s neighborhood? I'm going to go through CalCrim Jury Instruction 8.44. It says, no specific emotion alone constitutes heat of passion. Neither fear, revenge, nor the emotion induced by the accompanying or following an intent to commit a felony, nor any of or all of these emotional states in and of themselves constitute the heat of passion referred to in the law of manslaughter. Any and all of these emotions may be involved in a heat of passion that causes judgment to give way to impulse and rashness. This was an act of impulse and rashness. Also, any one or more of them may exist in the mind of a person who acts deliberately from choice, whether the choice is reasonable or unreasonable. So it's a range of emotions. It's not just, okay, were you angry? Okay, that's heat of passion. Were you in fear? Okay, that's heat of passion. No, it's all of the range of emotions, powerful emotions that would be stirred up in a reasonable person under the same or similar circumstances. So while under that heat of passion, from that provocation, from Nipsey Hussle, this serious accusation done in this manner, a mere 9 minutes later, he shot and killed Nipsey Hussle. 9 minutes is a very short period of time for such a serious, life-threatening provocation and accusation like this. 9 minutes. Clearly, emotions did not have time to clear in that short amount of time. As soon as Mr. Holder got into the car, he told Brianita, drive around the block, which he did. He took out his gun. She parked in the alley after he told him to. He gets out of the car and he walks over and he shoots Nipsey Hussle. There was no cooling off period. There was no time to reflect. He was still acting under the heat of passion of that provocation. Look when he first approaches the group. He doesn't have any animosity in his heart. He's just coming over to say hello. It was because Nipsey Hussle made this accusation against him. That's what provoked him. Otherwise, he would have gotten his chili cheese fries and he would have went back along his way. This was the act that provoked him. This was a provocation and there was no cooling off period. The burden then is on the district attorney to show beyond a reasonable doubt that there was a cooling off period. So let's look at the timeline of events. And this is from Defense Exhibit I, and we'll play that for you in a minute. At the 10-second mark, Eric Holder joins the group, shakes their hand, leans up against the car, and Nipsey Hussle starts talking to him about having paperwork on him. At 44 seconds, Brianita Nicholson joins the group. and she stays for about 53 seconds. At 4:20, Eric Holder leaves the group. At 7 minutes and 10 seconds, Eric Holder comes back and says goodbye. And at 13 minutes and 30 seconds, Mr. Holder returns and starts shooting. It's only 9 minutes and 10 seconds from the time Mr. Holder left the group after being accused of snitching to the time of shooting. Is that a cooling off period for such a serious public accusation by someone of the status of Nipsey Hussle? That's a very short amount of time to expect someone to cool off from this range of emotions. Let's talk a little bit about Cowboy, Mr. Herman Douglas's credibility problems in this case. Only 2 people testified that heard any of the conversation, right? Brianita Nicholson and Mr. Herman Douglas. According to Mr. Douglas, who's a registered sex offender for felony sexual assault and is currently on felony probation for car theft out of the airport court, mainly his credibility problem is that he blames himself. But at the same time, he doesn't want other people to blame him for not protecting Nipsey. So he's locked into this ridiculous narrative that there was no hint of any animosity, irritation involved in this conversation, that everything was just lovely, it's just homeboys chopping it up, and everything was fine. Otherwise, he would have escorted Mr. Holder off the premises to protect the talent, as he put it. He even goes so far to say is that retaliation for snitching is something that happened in the 80s and 90s, when both gang experts said that's not true, it still happens. And we know that all of the witnesses that I named earlier had problems testifying in this gang case. But even in his own Instagram video, he says, "Where I come from, snitches don't last." That's not in the 80s or 90s, that was June 2nd, 2022. He said, Nipsey never called Eric a snitch. We know that's not true. We know that's just wordplay. He didn't say the word snitch, but he said they have paperwork on you. That's just another way of saying the same thing. If someone says, "I never called you a pedophile, I just called you a child molester," it's the same thing, right? It's just another way of saying the same thing. He said he never even heard Eric use the term snitch, when we know from Brianita that he was constantly saying, "Are you saying I snitch? Did you say I snitch? Did someone say I snitch? Do you snitch? Have you ever snitched?" We know that he said it repeatedly. He described the conversation and the tone of the conversation as friendly. That's contrary to what Brianita told us. He held back a comment from Nipsey Hussle. The comment, "I wonder how this is going to unfold," which should have put him on warning that something was up, that Nipsey had a concern when he saw Eric Holder drive up. He never mentioned that in his May 2019 grand jury testimony that Nipsey made this comment. And he never mentioned it on direct examination when Mr. McKinney asked him, what did Mr. Nipsey Hussle say when he drove up? And he didn't admit it on cross-examination until I found the clip on YouTube from his June 2022 interview that I just played for you. And in that interview, he said that this haunts him. So we know that this is something that he wouldn't have forgot to tell us. That this was something that was haunting him ever since it happened, all the way in 2022. Now that's haunting him that Nipsey said that. And why didn't he tell us at the grand jury? Why didn't he tell Mr. McKinney that Nipsey Hussle said that? Why didn't he tell us, this jury here, when he testified on direct examination, that Nipsey Hussle said that? Because it runs counter to his narrative that he had no idea that something was about to happen. Not to mention, he's got a financial interest in this, in continuing to do several YouTube interviews, paid and unpaid. Let me talk to you about the law in this case. The standard for a criminal case is beyond a reasonable doubt. It's the highest standard we have. That's the burden of proof that the prosecutor has to prove beyond a reasonable doubt. So when they charge first degree, willful, premeditated murder, they have to prove that beyond a reasonable doubt. What does that mean? That means you have to have an abiding conviction of the truth of what you're voting on. And you have to be able to live with it. So not just today, not just tomorrow, but 10 years from now. You have to be able to look back 30 years, 50 years and say, you know what, I made the right decision. Deliberate and premeditated murder is given in the instruction 820. And this is how it describes deliberate. The word deliberate, which relates to how a person thinks, means formed or arrived at or determined upon a result of careful thought and weighing considerations for and against the proposed action. Soon, when we both sit down, you're going to get your final jury instructions and you're going to go into the room and you're going to deliberate. You're going to give careful thought and you're going to weigh the considerations for and against your verdict. It also says, if you find that the killing was preceded and accompanied by a clear, deliberate intent on the part of the defendant to kill, which was the result of deliberation and premeditation, so that it must have been formed upon pre-existing reflection and not under sudden heat of passion or other condition precluding the idea of deliberation. It is murder in the first degree. So it has to be not under the sudden heat of passion. So that takes away the element of malice of forethought, and that is what makes the homicide a voluntary manslaughter instead of a murder. So let me read that again. Must have been formed upon pre-existing reflection and not under sudden heat of passion or other condition precluding the idea of deliberation. This is what happened in this case, and this is what happened, and I told you this is what happened from the beginning of the case. I was up front about what we were going to show, the evidence showed. That Mr. Holder had no idea he was going to be there that day, that he was provoked by this provocative accusation that he was a snitch, and that he acted under the heat of passion based on that provocation. Within 9 minutes of him leaving the group, he returned and started shooting. That is not a cooling off period. Now, counsel gave you some examples of what a heat of passion would be, that it has to be immediate, that you have to act rashly, like immediately after being provoked. That's not the law. The law doesn't say that it has to be a situation where you come home and your child is being molested in the bedroom and then you immediately react. No, the law doesn't say that. That is one example of heat of passion, but the law doesn't put that time limit that it has to be immediate. This is what CalCrim 8.42 says about sudden quarrel or heat of passion and provocation. The heat of passion which will reduce a homicide to manslaughter must be such as a passion as naturally would be aroused in the mind of an ordinary, reasonable person in the same circumstances. Now, this is important because I want you to understand what heat of passion is and what the law says heat of passion is. Heat of passion does not require the provocation to provoke you to kill. That's not the law, and I'll read it to you in a minute. So you might say, yeah, you know, this was pretty bad. This was really serious. It would arouse emotions in me, but I wouldn't go and kill a person because of that. That's not what's required. The law doesn't require that the provocation be severe enough to drive a reasonable person to kill. Rather, the issue is whether the actual provocation was such that a reasonable person would commit any act rashly and from passion rather than from judgment because of it. So if you tell yourself, that's pretty bad, I probably would sock him in the face, that's provocation. That's an adequate provocation. That would cause you to react rashly without thinking. Doesn't mean that it would cause you to go get your gun and shoot the person. That's not what the law requires. Just that you would act rashly under that provocation and without deliberating. So how long would it take you to calm down from this public accusation of being a snitch by someone as famous as Nipsey Hussle? 9 minutes? You think in 9 minutes that you would be cooled off enough to deliberate and premeditate? No. 9 minutes is way too short for something this serious, with the consequences being this serious. So what is heat of passion? What is heat of passion? Heat of passion negates malice aforethought for murder and makes the homicide voluntary manslaughter. So there's manslaughter, there's homicides, and homicide is one human being killing another. There's voluntary manslaughter, and there's murder, different types of homicides. This is not some liberal California rule that we have here to protect defendants. This is a common law rule that came down to us from England. This is not a defense. The accused, if they're convicted, they don't get to just walk. If you find that it was heat of passion, that's not a defense. You're not going to find not guilty. You would find guilty of the correct level of homicide. It's not victim blaming for provoking you. We are all presumed not to kill when provoked. That's why it's a crime. That's why it's voluntary manslaughter. It's not an excuse and it's not a justification. What is it? It's simply determining the correct level of homicide. As I said, there's voluntary manslaughter, then there's murder in the second and the first degree. What you are doing and what we're asking you to do based on the evidence in this case is find that the correct degree is voluntary manslaughter homicide because of the provocation, because he was acting under the heat of passion. This case has been overcharged from the beginning. Mr. Holder was always ready to take responsibility for his actions.
Ladies and gentlemen, base your decision on the facts as presented in this courtroom. Continue, sir.
Thank you, Ron. I told you up front that Mr. Holder Jr. shot Nipsey Hussle and accidentally shot the other two individuals in this case, but that it was voluntary manslaughter. But it was overcharged as a first-degree murder. Not only that, Kerry Latham and Sherman Villanueva, he was also charged with first-degree attempted murder of these two individuals. That tells you that it's overcharged. Plus, they added an assault with a firearm against those two individuals. So what they're really telling you is, okay, if you don't go for the attempted murder against them, get them for the assault with a firearm. These other two charges would be a fallback position. There was no specific intent by Mr. Holder Jr. to kill either one of these two men. Now, I've heard counsel tell you a couple of times that attempt is just an ineffectual act towards killing. No, it's not just that. It's also, you have to have the specific intent to kill that person. And then you make an ineffectual act to kill that person. That's what attempted murder is. And if it's premeditated, deliberate, then they also have to prove those allegations too to get first-degree attempted murder against these two individuals. There's no evidence that he had the specific intent to kill Kerry Latham. There's no evidence that he had a specific intent to kill Sherman Villanueva. He didn't even know these two individuals. They weren't even there when he had the conversation with Nipsey Hussle. We saw who was there. It was Rimpau, Cowboy, Ms. Nicholson, and the stranger. And when he walked away, it was those same people, except Ms. Nicholson had already left. So Mr. Latham and Mr. Villanueva was not even part of this conversation about snitching. So, and you're going to see in the video that they arrive as Mr. Holder is walking away. So he had no reason to kill these two other individuals. He didn't even know that they would be standing there at the time when he came back. Nothing was ever said to Mr. Latham, and if you remember, Mr. Latham testified that when Mr. Holder said, "You're through," he said he wasn't talking to me. And Mr. Villanueva never heard any words. He was too far away from Mr. Holder. Where are we? Okay. Could you back up a little bit to the 4-minute mark? Try it. On the right is the SUV Villanueva. You can see Mr. Latham gets out of the car. Eric shakes Cowboy's hand. He doesn't shake Nipsey Hussle's hand. And he walks away as Mr. Latham comes over to the group. Mr. Villanueva is still in his SUV, and then you're going to see him park. So Mr. Holder had no contact with Mr. Latham. He was walking away as Mr. Latham was arriving. So why would he have an intent, specific intent to try to kill Mr. Latham? Makes no sense. It's overcharged. It's an assault with a firearm. Or at least an attempted voluntary manslaughter. But it's definitely not attempted murder, let alone attempted first-degree premeditated deliberate murder against Mr. Latham. Where's the deliberation? Could you play it a little more, Mr. Clayton? Are you at 440? Yes. Let's play it a little more until we see Mr. Villanueva get out. Mr. Holder walking across to Ms. Nicholson's car to get some extra money to finish paying for his meal. Mr. Villanueva testified that he was doing something with his dashboard, I think, that was malfunctioning, so he didn't get out immediately when his uncle got out. Okay, now Mr. Villanueva is on the scene. Mr. Holder has left. He came back, said his goodbyes, and you know what happens after that. He returns. Let's go to 12:58, Mr. Clayton. Top left corner. This is the video that you've seen many times over, but I want you to note the position of, especially Mr. Villanueva at the time of the shooting. He is not in between the cars. About 5 feet away. Thank you, Mr. Clayton. There are a number of ways where Mr. Lathan could have been struck and Mr. Villanueva grazed. That raised reasonable doubt as to the specific intent that Mr. Holder supposedly had to murder these two individuals, let alone premeditate. The coroner testified that when people are close together, Nipsey Hussle had through wounds. You notice Mr. Askedom was standing right in front of Eric Holder when he started shooting. Before Mr. Villanueva was able to turn and run, we know that there were through wounds that went through Mr. Villanueva and could have grazed, through wounds that went through Mr. Askedom and could have grazed Mr. Villanueva. So it's not even clear that Mr. Holder shot directly at Mr. Villanueva. Why would he? He was there to take care of business he had with Mr. Askedom. Why would he shoot on the side of him when his target is right in front of him? Why is he going to shoot to hit Mr. Villanueva, who had nothing to do with anything? Let alone intend to kill him and premeditate him. Same thing with Mr. Latham. Mr. Latham was closer to Mr. Ascadon, but he had no reason to intend to kill Mr. Latham. Had no contact with him. The men didn't know each other. They didn't know each other. Mr. Latham even told you that he wasn't talking to me when he said that. He was addressing Mr. Ascadon. The coroner also testified that there could be ricochets, so that when Mr. Latham turned to run, a bullet could have ricocheted off of one of the cars or a door handle and lodged in his back once he turned. When people are close together like that, bullets can ricochet off of things and strike other individuals. That's what the coroner testified to. We know that shooting with your offhand, whether your offhand is your right hand or your left hand, shooting with your offhand, you're not going to be very accurate. Anyone that's tried to shoot a foul shot with their left hand knows what I'm talking about. Try to write with your left hand, or try to do something that requires dexterity with your offhand. It's not going to be accurate, it's not going to be as strong. And in this case, Mr. Holder was shooting two guns and not able to use the proper one-handed grip. And so therefore his accuracy was reduced. That's also a reasonable inference from the evidence. And when Mr. Latham is down on the ground and incapacitated, if Mr. Holder had the specific intent to murder him, he could have finished him off right there, right? But he didn't do anything to him. He just dealt with Mr. Ascadon and kicked him in the head on his way out for good measure. That shows rage. Right? That shows a heat of passion. Counsel is calling it something personal, but that's heat of passion. That's what you look for, the conduct of the individual. So the two attempted murder charges are overcharged. They should be assault with a deadly weapon. I'm going to read you a jury instruction about two reasonable interpretations of the evidence. And it's CalCrim 2.01.
CalJIT?
Yes, CalJIT. We're using CalJIT 2.01. And it's entitled Sufficiency of Circumstantial Evidence Generally. I'm going to read this whole paragraph so I'm not accused of taking it out of context. But this is circumstantial evidence. And when there are two reasonable interpretations of the evidence, and one points to innocence and one points to guilt, you must accept the one that points to innocence. So if you think that Mr. Latham and Mr. Villanueva were struck accidentally because he was shooting with his offhand, if you thought that it's reasonable, as the coroner testified, that it could have been a through and through that struck, especially Mr. Villanueva, because he was standing behind him. If you think that Mr. Latham could have been hit by a ricochet, if these are reasonable interpretations of the evidence, then you must accept them, and you must reject the one that points to guilt. So it says, also, if the circumstantial evidence as to any particular count permits two reasonable interpretations, one of which points to the defendant's guilt and the other to his innocence, you must adopt the interpretation that points to the defendant's innocence and reject the interpretation that points to his guilt. You must, not you can, you should, you can if you want to, you must accept the one that points to innocence. if they're both reasonable. So what I wanted to do is show you all of the facts and circumstances surrounding why Mr. Holder shot Mr. Askedon and how Mr. Latham and Mr. Villanueva got grazed accidentally. I wanted to show you that he was just enjoying his life. It wasn't some jealousy or any of the other rumors that might be going around. He was just living his life in Long Beach and just happened to come to that center. No one knew Nipsey Hussle was going to be there that day. There's no evidence of any personal animus or any jealousy on behalf of Mr. Holder. That's all speculation that the district attorney is coming up with because he said you're through. You're through spreading rumors about it. You're through talking smack about it. You're through humiliating me, embarrassing me. You're through putting a bounty on my life. That's what we're dealing with. Because you see, when he first walks over there, he's perfectly friendly. He doesn't have anything against Mr. Askedon. It's Mr. Askedon who then starts going in about this snitching stuff. What is that about? That was a provocation. That was a heat of passion. So I wanted you to see all of the circumstances that led up to March 31st, to see that Mr. Holder had no animus and that it was this provocation by Mr. Askedon that caused my client to become so enraged that he acted rashly, without reflecting, without a cooling off period, and that this was voluntary manslaughter in the heat of passion.